Good evening. Quick question. Has anybody here stayed at an Airbnb? Let's see a show of hands. So basically nobody. It was pretty much every hand. But let's see, who here's actually been an Airbnb host? All right, there's just a few, about 10 hands. And has anybody here been to the Airbnb headquarters, 888 Brandon? Isn't it amazing, right? If you go there, they brought all the famous listings, bringing the local in as the actual meeting rooms. It's quite fascinating. So Riley, congratulations. I would love to first hear about your background. One thing, it's amazing what he's done. He is running the data science, but he's also had a career in the Coast Guard, the United Nations. But what I think is really special is he is a hometown local San Francisco-born native. So let's give him a round of applause for that. That's rare. Let's hear about your background.
Sure. Yeah, I feel like an endangered species in San Francisco these days. It's kind of funny. So I grew up here in the Bay Area. It is, the epicenter of a lot of great things. Certainly technology, but it's also, I think, San Francisco is very much a world city. When I was an undergrad, I did an internship at the UN. I spent about 6 months with them, which was something that was very fascinating to me. It sort of connected with this identity of being part of the international community. And at the time, it was funny, it was a kind of a low point for US foreign policy, and you'd tell people that you're American, and they'd sort of turn away from you. But I was A/B testing that a little bit, and to other people, I'd say, well, I'm actually from San Francisco, or the Bay Area, and got this totally different reaction. They loved it. And they were so welcoming and friendly, and so that was something that very much resonated.
There's something in the air here. I don't know what it is.
Something special about this place. When I was an undergrad, I joined the Coast Guard to help pay for school, and it just seemed like more of an interesting kind of weekend job than like a pizzeria.
And you had a really interesting role.
Yeah. If you want to, so we, it was right after 9/11, and I was up in Seattle. The governor of Washington was very worried about the next terrorist attack occurring at the port of Seattle-Tacoma, and so she actually financed out of her state budget the creation of the Coast Guard's first SWAT team. So, alongside being a student, on the weekdays, on the weekends, I'd go learn how to be a Rambo, which was kind of fun. But anyways, what was interesting about college and kind of getting back to the UN and this, sense of, connecting with, all things international, I really wanted to travel, but didn't, have much of an opportunity because of the Coast Guard. And so following graduation, I spent about 5 months, going all over the world, all through Asia and Africa, and finished in the UK, where I went to grad school. And had a fantastic experience there, wanted to stay on and get a PhD, but the Coast Guard called me back. And so I said, okay, well, I'll go to San Francisco and kind of round out my time with the Coast Guard, and in the meantime, get a lot of exposure to data analysis and economics. That was right as, I think what you referred to as, the economic nuclear blast or something hit. It was, the worst recession in American history.
2008.
2008, and spent a lot of time trying to understand how that would play out, and really fell in love with using data to understand the world around us. So a few years later, I was done with the Coast Guard obligation. I was all ready to go back to the UK and do this PhD. But in the same week, I met the founders of Airbnb and my wife. So it was a pretty big week.
Well, I'm not asking you to prioritize.
Yeah.
She's right here. She's very lovely.
She's here. Brian and Joe are back in the city. So.
Yep. Second.
No, so there was something that was very striking about Airbnb. It was an idea that certainly resonated with my interest in travel. And coming from the Coast Guard, there was a sense of doing something that actually contributed to positive change in the world. It was very humanitarian, it seemed. Mm-hmm. And also, having spent a lot of time trying to understand the recession, it seemed like this great opportunity for people to make money in a way that they hadn't in the past, and invest that locally in kind of local businesses, their communities, that sort of thing. So. At the time, it hadn't really taken off, but it seemed like something great, and so I blew off the PhD and stayed.
That's amazing. Airbnb has changed the world. People were being foreclosed in 2008, and they didn't have a choice. They didn't have a chance. They were angry at the banks, and Airbnb gave them an opportunity. Now, it's really interesting, Riley. There was some journalists that recently reported that Wyndham Hotels is worth $7 billion market cap, and Hyatt Hotels is worth $9 billion market cap. But 5-year-old Airbnb, who owns no beds, bathrooms, or bars, is worth $10 billion market valuation. Now, this begs a question. We're obviously talking about disruption, as Jeff teed up and Mr. Churchill. We're talking about game changing. That's the word that you received. And when there is a game change, there's somebody else on the other side of that playing field. Who is that?
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting about Airbnb is I think what we're certainly innovating in travel, but I think what we're really innovating upon is trust. And I think what we've disrupted is this concept that you may not be able to trust someone that you don't know in a place that you've never been. There's a lot of talk about how Airbnb is changing the way we travel. I actually don't think that's true. I think we're returning to a style of travel that the world used to engage in. If you went to some other city a long time ago, generations ago, you were going and staying with people that you knew. But as globalization picked up and people started moving more and more around the world, there's this information gap between people who need a place to stay and vacant spaces. And so Airbnb, I think, is bridging that information gap and simultaneously, building trust between people who had never met each other before.
That's great. I was recently, I cover your market, I look at it very closely, and I was talking to this Iowa insurance company, and they said, Jeremiah, we love what you're doing and covering this whole sharing collaborative thing, but it's not new. We've been doing this in the Midwest for 300, 400 years. It's called being a good neighbor. And so they're basically doing this to the Silicon Valley guy. And then I said, well, but hold on. We're enabling people to be good neighbors to strangers, and that's what you've done. Mm-hmm. Everybody can be a good neighbor.
That's right.
I would love to hear from you about the early days at Airbnb. You're employee number 9, is that right?
Yeah, ballpark, yeah.
I'm going to hit you up for a loan after this.
Yeah.
So I can buy a Tesla S85. But I'd love to hear about the early days. Were you guys heavily funded? Did you have like all the food things like in Google? Did you guys have elaborate Bentleys driving you? What was it like?
Yeah, we had all that. No, we did not have that. It was funny. We were joking at the table here. So I just started dating, my wife, and I had just started at this, fledgling company called Airbnb that no one had heard of and no one seemed to be able to pronounce. So I brought Alex over. I was like, look at our new office. And we're working out of Brian and Joe's bedroom. And there's like a couple of us coding in this kind of like dark room. It sort of smelled. And then,
Is that what she said, or you admitted to that?
That's what she said, okay. And I agree. It was true. And then we would have, company meetings on the roof on a bunch of blow-up furniture. And that was our roots. It was very scrappy. It was a very exciting and intense, couple years. And we certainly were passionate about sort of the mission, what we were there to do. It was very clear to everyone that we were creating something that was, very disruptive, but also very beneficial. And so I think that's something that really, that's a thread that we can tie through, the years that I've been there. It's very scrappy, but, very, I think high-minded and very positive. It's a very positive culture.
Tell us more about how that positive culture is fostering innovation.
Yeah, I think, I guess another way to think of being scrappy is resilience, which is certainly something that resonates with Churchill. It hasn't been easy, that's for sure. It's been an intense, few years. There's a lot that we've, run up against. And I think when you're disrupting something or creating a very disruptive business, there's naturally going to be a lot of, friction along the way. And you're kind of dealing with that alongside, hypergrowth and trying to kind of hold everything together with duct tape alongside trying to build a business that, will help us grow into the future. So I think that has been kind of a very fascinating, experience that we've been working through, and we've had to be incredibly resilient, all along.
So I'd love to hear about some of your passion projects with data. I mean, you're mapping the digital neighborhood. What are some amazing things that you've found through your research as a scientist? Sure.
Something that I've been really kind of promoting both inside and outside Airbnb recently is that, data, another way to think about it is it's the voice of the customer. And data scientists, can translate that voice into a language that others can understand. And so, as people kind of click around the website or choose this listing instead of that listing, the reviews that they leave for, the host that they stay with, that's them telling us directly what works and what doesn't about Airbnb. And so there's been some really kind of fascinating work that we've done in the past to try to turn that data into information that can drive decisions about how to continue to grow and expand Airbnb and make it better. And we employ it everywhere in the business. We think about how should we drive growth of Airbnb based on where people are searching and where they want to stay, and how can we optimize, the conversion rate of a search to a booking and a great experience. And there's some really fascinating things along the way that we've had to grapple with, that you might not expect. Like, somebody searches for San Francisco, I want to stay at a place in San Francisco. Well, what does that actually mean? People could want to stay anywhere in the city, and there's actually very different neighborhoods where people want to go. And so we use, data, people's past experiences, to inform answers to questions like that.
So their past behavior
survey them.
will recommend things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've also integrated sometimes Facebook data as well, right? So you can find matchings.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way to log in for sure. You can use Facebook Connect.
Yeah, that's great. We were chatting earlier about this whole ecosystem that Airbnb has bloomed around it, maybe intentionally or not. There's been cleaning services and key exchanges. What are some of the most interesting or surprising startups that you've seen revolve around your company? I think that's a sign of major success, a game changer, when there's little orbits around you.
Yeah, I think the funniest thing, at least from the perspective of an early employee in the early days, was starting to see some of these businesses sprout up, and it was like this real confirmation of what we were doing. It was that, and also hearing about every company is like the Airbnb for something, or every new startup is like we're the Airbnb for
there's an Uber whatever. For this, an Airbnb for that. I'm sure all the VCs hear the same thing.
Yeah. And
there's an Uber for weed I found out called Eased. It's true.
Yeah. So I mean, there's all these businesses that have sprouted up kind of around us, and I think that's very exciting for us because it shows that this is something that's here to stay, and it's something that people really want, and it clarifies kind of opportunities for improving the product that we've been working on.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, this marketplace coming from supply that we never even imagined. So let's talk about, have some real honest discussions. Airbnb's had challenges. There's different cities react in great ways and not so great ways. Airbnb, I've read, has been banned in this city or that, and then it's changed. There's been examples when people have had crazy adult parties or something like that happening. But I would love to hear, you don't have to comment on those specific things, but Jeff would be interested. The Valley is fraught with companies that do change and pivot. I'd love to hear, what is like the culture that enables you guys to get past some significant global top of media front page challenges that you guys have experienced?
Sure. Well, I would bring that back to this kind of theme of resilience, right? We truly believe in what we're doing, and we get such positive signals from the people who use Airbnb. The reviews that they leave are overwhelmingly positive. The experiences that people have tend to be, overall very, very good. And even the cities themselves where Airbnb is very, present, as they start to engage with the people who are using Airbnb locally, the hosts, the guests who are coming to the cities, and they see like the money that the hosts are making, that they're investing locally, and how they're, creating new connections with people from all over the world, it's very hard to look at that and find something negative. So again, it's, internally, I think there's this, real culture of resilience, and externally, I think there's a lot of people who are kind of starting to understand what we're all about. And I mean, this is, on a very local level, something that I deal with. I'm still trying to get my parents to give this a shot, and
to stay or to host?
Both. So it takes people a while to come around to the idea that somebody's going to be staying in your place. It's just a very foreign concept to people. But what we find is that when people try it, they really like it.
Well, what recommendations do you give? Like, most of the hands went up of people here that are actually guests, but there was only 10 hands up that were hosts. Can you help all the guests here explain to them why they would love to have me come over and stay?
Yeah. Wouldn't you guys want Jeremiah to stay in your place? Come on.
Yeah.
We're very honest with ourselves. I think it's the kind of thing that works very well for many people. Some people just don't have the space, or it just doesn't work with their kind of living circumstances. But for those that do, it's something that I actually think it makes a lot of sense to me that Airbnb sprung up in the midst of the worst recession in history. It was a moment where people were looking around for something that could help them get through it. And we've got these incredible stories of people who, who fed their families, who saved their mortgages, whatnot, by trying hosting because they've got this spare room in their place, and it was like, well, let's try this.
Right.
And then it turned out to be a really good thing. They're making money, they're meeting people, they have these great experiences. And so it really clicks.
And some people don't even do it for the money. They want to just connect with. I've stayed with some folks, and they were empty nesters, and they just wanted to meet really interesting young Asian guys.
Well, there you go. So, there's that.
That's on my profile, my Airbnb profile. Okay. Recently in the news, Airbnb has moved into other areas in hospitality, such as food and experimenting. Tell us about the future. Where is this all headed?
Sure. So, there was a really interesting moment in Airbnb history back in, the end of 2011. And it's funny because, back then we still had this feeling that, there was just so much ahead of us still to do, but people were already starting to talk about what's Airbnb going to do next? Is it still travel, or is it, something else? And Brian, our CEO, it's funny, whenever he reads, something, over Christmas, he goes away for Christmas, he reads a bunch of books, he comes back, and then he's got all these new ideas. And so that Christmas, I think he was thinking a lot about this, and he read Walt Disney's biography. And Disney was confronted with sort of a similar question, where he was, very experienced and successful with animations, but had moved to Hollywood, and the deal in Hollywood was, feature-length films, but not animations. And so he was kind of confronted with the same question of do I keep doing what I've been doing, or do I pivot and do something different? He decided, no, I'm gonna make feature-length animation films, and continued on to be very successful.
A new category.
Yeah, and so I think Brian was thinking a lot about this in early 2012, and we went through this really interesting process. We call it, the Snow White experience, where it's we thought a lot about, what we were doing, travel, and kind of this experience that people had on Airbnb. And we actually storyboarded the whole process. We went through both, you've seen it, yeah. Both the guests and the host frames.
Tell everybody what it looks like so they can imagine in their mind.
We actually had a guy from Pixar come in and animate, every frame of the guest and host experience. And it's these are the critical moments that people go through. And we took a step back and thought about that, and it was it would be crazy to neglect, this whole experience in favor of doing something totally different, because there's still so much to do. We're only touching a portion of it. There was, the online kind of booking component, but there was still so much that was happening offline. And that was the beginning of Airbnb, moving in the direction of becoming a hospitality brand, which I think, ultimately led to the rebrand that we did this summer. I mean, it was about, kind of moving away from just being an online platform for booking a place where you want to stay and becoming a true hospitality company. It also coincided with bringing Chip Conley on, who's been a great presence in the company. And so this is something we think a lot about for Airbnb's future. I think there's
Mr. Mendenhall, your new CMO.
Yeah.
From Coke.
Yeah, exactly, Jonathan.
So just to pause on that, so the founder, CEO of JDV Hotels, and a top executive in marketing from Coke joined Airbnb. That's pretty significant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, so I guess what I would say is when we think about the future of the company, and I think about myself as a Bay Area native, a local, when I have people who travel into San Francisco and want to do something here, I love showing them kind of the best that we have to offer, and that's I think the really great thing about Airbnb is that when you go to this new place that you've never been, you can stay with somebody who really wants to show you the best of what they have, and
like an old friend.
Like an old friend. And if that's what we can create in the future, if we create more of that, then I think we've done a good thing.
And that's a great story on resilience. Mm-hmm. Strangers being like real friends. So I'd love for you to close out with a vision 5 years from now. Another 5 years goes by. How has the world changed because of Airbnb? What does this look like? Yeah,
well, I mean, when I think about that, I think about these sort of global cities or global communities of connections. I think right now there are a lot of relationships that are very local, and you've got Facebook and a lot of social networks that connect you to people that you already know. But what I think Airbnb is doing is creating so many new connections around the world, and so kind of where that leaves us is an open question, but it's interesting.
I'd like just to propose a toast to Riley and Airbnb on the term resilient. I'd like you to raise your glasses and we will cheers. 1, 2, 3, resilience. Cheers.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.